Okay, I think we can, yeah, I think we can get started. And thank you so much, Hugh, for being with us today. And this is the great gift for TESOL Ukraine community.
You're
Hugh is
welcome.
our huge supporter, and not only because every time we get so much new and interesting from him. So, and please, Hugh, I give floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marina, and thank you to everyone at TESOL Ukraine for organising not only this particular webinar, but for all the work that I know you do, kind of connecting and supporting teachers in Ukraine during, you know, what's obviously a very difficult time. So it's my pleasure to be able to do, you know, some small little thing for you. And hello to everyone out there. So what I'm going to be talking about really is the way in which changing the way you think about language and changing the way you think about language learning maybe impacts on what you do in the classroom and the way you approach classroom practice. Okay. And maybe for those of you who saw the title in advance, you might have noticed this word, colligation. And maybe it scared you a little bit. And you thought, whoa, not sure I know what that word means. Maybe some of you even went away and looked up this word, or maybe you're doing that at this exact moment as I'm speaking. And it's quite a strange thing because, as we will see, the idea of colligation has been around in language teaching for decades, but it hasn't really made much impact on mainstream English language teaching. When I did my own teacher training, when I did my CELTA, my Delta, nobody mentioned this idea. It was a kind of foreign concept that I didn't know about until much, much later. And the actual word colligation is a very old word. It goes right back to the 16th century in England. And it comes from a Latin verb, colligare. Okay, always nice pronouncing Latin sounding words. Just say it one more time, just because it's nice. Colligare. And col means together. Okay, so you've got things like collaborate. Yeah, you know, which can obviously be both a positive and a negative thing, depending who you're collaborating with. And this word ligare, which I guess is where you get things like ligature, like to tie around your arm, you know, to stop bleeding or to make the veins stand out, means to bind or to tie. And originally, this idea of colligating things meant kind of binding and twisting things together. So, you know, in the old days when people were making roofs from dried reeds or dried grasses, or you were making woven baskets, basically what you were doing was colligating. Yeah, you were kind of weaving and joining things together. Obviously, that doesn't have much to do with English language teaching, but the concept came into English language teaching through one of the great, kind of almost forgotten now, English linguists of the 20th century, a guy called J.R. Firth. And he first mentioned it in this book he wrote in 1957, where he said, colligation is the interrelation of grammatical categories in syntactical structures. If you're sitting there looking at that sentence thinking, oh, I must be stupid because I don't really understand what that means, you're not alone. Okay, I read that sentence like 15 times and just thought, yeah, kind of about grammar and stuff, but I don't really understand what that means. I think a better way to think about what colligation is to think about it in relation to maybe the more popular, the more well-known idea of collocation. So collocation, I'm guessing many of you know, is words which co-locate, which co-occur, or as one of my friends said, words that like to get married. And, you know, often the collocations will be different from one language to another language. So in English, you know, sorry I'm late, the traffic was really heavy. in lots of languages, that might be the traffic was really big, or there was big traffic. I know that when I'm speaking Indonesian, you say big traffic, not heavy traffic. You know, if you embarrass yourself in public, you might lose a face. When you start a new class, you have to try and gain their respect. So you've got these adjectives which go with particular nouns, adverbs which go with particular verbs, verbs which go with particular nouns, and so on. This is collocation. Colligation is the grammatical patterns that occur with individual words. And just to give you one quick example, I don't know if you've ever been asked what's the active form of I was born. Okay, so you know, you say I was born in 1969, for example. Well, students often try to make that active and say, you know, my wife borned a baby, okay, or borned last night. And it doesn't work like that. You know, she had a baby, she gave birth last night. Basically, born only exists in the passive, almost exclusively in the past simple passive. That's the grammatical pattern that attaches itself to that word, yeah, to be born, yeah? So that's the colligation of the word. I first encountered this idea when I read a book by Michael Hoey, who sadly died last year. He was a professor of linguistics at University of Liverpool. And he basically said this, that colligation is this idea that different bits of vocabulary, different lexical items are kind of generally used with other lexical items so that they may be primed, and also that they may be used with particular grammatical functions. So when they occur with other lexical items, that's collocation. When they occur with particular grammatical functions, that's colligation. Or they may just avoid particular grammatical patterns or avoid particular collocations. Yeah. Hopefully this will make sense when we look at some examples, and there is a reason why all of this connects to your classroom, in case you're panicking about that. Just a simple example. Say you take some of these verbs of perception, like hear or notice or see. Well, they often have very particular colligations, very particular grammatical patterns that go with them. They're often followed by an object, and they're often followed by an ing clause. And after that, they're often followed by adverbials of time or place. So you get these little patterns like, hey, I heard you coming in last night, drunk, 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I thought it was strange. I noticed him last night hanging around outside the house. I heard someone screaming outside in the middle of the night. Oh, I love his music. I saw him playing live when I was in Belgrade last time. Okay, so they've all got these similar kinds of patterns, like verb plus object plus ing plus adverbial. Yeah.
44B, 45.
Can you turn your microphone off, 45B person?
What's your choice?
Okay. So when I read the Michael Hoey book, he said this, that when you've got different meanings of one word, one of the ways in which you understand the different meanings is because certain senses or meanings of the word will have common collocations and common grammatical patterns, and other meanings of that word will have different collocations and different grammatical patterns, different colligations. Even when different meanings of words are quite rare, this will still be the case, that different meanings have different grammatical and collocational patterns. And this is just one example. Say you take the noun cause, okay? If you look it up in a dictionary, it will tell you the most common meaning of cause is an event, thing, or person that makes something happen. Well, this meaning of cause has particular colligations, particular grammatical patterns. So it's usually followed by of, okay? Usually it's a definite article, the cause or the causes of, and usually there's another noun or a noun phrase after it. So you get things like, well, the main cause of these accidents is, drivers going too fast. I've got to write an essay on the causes of the First World War. Okay. When you look at the third most common meaning of cause, it's a kind of political cause or a social cause, like an aim or an organization that you support because you think it brings benefits to people. This meaning of cause works differently. It's usually at the end of the sentence. It usually has zero article, indefinite article, and it's got a much wider range of prepositions. So you see things like, yeah, it's hard work, you know, raising money, but it's all in a good cause. I'm not very sympathetic to their cause. You know, give what you can, please. It's for a worthy cause. And probably you don't think about this when you're reading or when you're listening, because when you're a fluent user, you do this automatically. It's just part of what your brain knows about the language. But when you're reading or when you're listening and you see, you know, the main causes of these accidents, and then later you see it's all in a good cause, well, how do you know those are different meanings of cause? Okay, it's the same word, it's spelt the same, it's a noun. Part of the way you must determine the understanding of this is because you recognize the main cause of something. Oh, that's this meaning of cause. It's all in a good cause at the end of a sentence with in a good. Well, that's this meaning of cause. So over time, through experience, through exposure to the language, you just kind of absorb this organic understanding of how the words work and how the meaning changes depending on the colligation, the position in the sentences, the articles, the prepositions, all of those kinds of things. And basically, that's the same for all the words that are out there. Different meanings of the same word have different collocations, and they work differently grammatically. And I think part of the problem is it's grammar, but it's like word grammar. It's grammar that's outside what you often think of as being the kind of grammar that we teach in classrooms. I mean, you know, usually that's what most people think of when they think of grammar. They think of Raymond Murphy's English Grammar in Use. The problem with that is that will teach you the present perfect simple, the past perfect continuous, mixed conditionals. It won't teach you the word grammar of cause or anything like that. This is kind of micro grammar that's outside the kind of tense dominated way we think about grammar. So once you understand that words have these particular patterns, that starts to have implications for the classroom, okay? One problem, I think, is that students will often tell you when you ask them, how do you feel about your English? Excuse me. Sorry, I'm kept going by large doses of caffeine. They'll often tell you, I know words, I have problems with grammar. And often they will have memorized or learned hundreds, maybe thousands of random single words, maybe with bilingual translations. They will have done the whole of Raymond Murphy's English Grammar in Use, maybe twice. And I think often what happens for students is when they try to use words they think they know, they struggle because the words don't collocate in the same way as they do in their first language, and they don't grammatically pattern or colligate in the way that they work in their first language. And I'm sure you all notice students doing this thing where the first language influence on the way they're speaking or writing in English is very strong. I mean, I can usually tell just from seeing a typed email by an intermediate or an upper intermediate student. I can probably tell you the first language of that student because I've seen so much student writing and I've heard so many kind of typical French English mistakes or typical Ukrainian English mistakes or German English mistakes or Japanese English mistakes that you can often feel the influence of the first language in the, you know, learner English versions of the second language. And students bring with them their own experience of how their first language works when they're speaking their second language. So you get things like, I'm agree, okay? It is depend of my girlfriend. I mean, if you've ever taught French students or Italian or Spanish, I mean, these are classic mistakes. But what kind of mistakes are they? You know, are they mistakes with the present simple? Does the student need to do another exercise on the present simple from another book like Murphy's English Grammar in Use? I would say they're not grammar problems in a way. I mean, you know, they're using the present simple. Okay, they're using it wrongly, but that's not because they don't know the present simple. It's because they don't know that the words agree and depend grammar differently in English. So maybe in their own mother tongue, I am agree is the way you'd say it. You say it as an adjective. Maybe in your mother tongue, you say it is depend of. And so what happens is students bring this with them when they're speaking the second language. And the grammatical influence of the first language, the colligations, transfers over into the second language. If you're a Ukrainian student, for example, okay, and in your mother tongue, you might express yourself in these particular ways. You probably don't need me to tell you that what then happens when you're learning English is you say things like, my father wants that I study law. Or maybe you just say, oh, cold, okay? Maybe you ask, how does she look? Okay, because what you're doing is, you know, you understand the idea of father, want, study, law, cold, look. You know, those ideas are obvious to you, but you're bringing with you the grammatical patterns from your first language that attach themselves to those words, but that don't work like that in English. Yeah. So your L1 influences the way in which you expect or hope or wish English works. Yeah. And, you know, as teachers, one of our jobs is to kind of recognize that that's what's happening and disrupt this. So I think one thing you can think about is a kind of two-stage process of correction where you're correcting the colligation. You're showing them, yeah. So in our language, I know it works like that. In English, don't ask me why. They do it strangely. I'm just the messenger. Yeah, they do it differently. It's a verb in English. It's not an adjective. You don't use the verb to be with it. You don't use of, you use on. And then what you can do to help students maybe get a more condensed, more compressed experience of how those words that they're struggling with work is you can give them a few more examples and you can add some extra language. So you might add something like, yeah, I half agree, I suppose. I half agree, I guess. I agree up to a point, but yeah, it depends on my girlfriend. I'm not really sure yet, to be honest. It depends what my girlfriend wants to do. Depends what time my girlfriend gets home. Depends whether my girlfriend's going out that night or not. And by giving students 2 or 3 extra examples that are similar to, but slightly different to, the mistake they've made, you're kind of repriming or reconditioning them to pay a bit more attention to and absorb more information about the way in which those words work in English. And again, you know, you might just say things like, yeah, so I know in Ukrainian, it's want that I. In English, it's a different pattern. You want somebody to do something. So, you know, that's the colligation of want. And then you might add something. Yeah, my dad's quite pushy. He wants me to study business, but I'm not sure I really want to. You know, I'm thinking English literature, maybe. Yeah, in English, for some weird reason, when you're talking about the weather, you have to say it's. So, it's hot in here. Whoa, it's really cold today. Or if it's really cold, it's freezing. Or, whoa, I'm freezing. I'm going to go and put another jacket on. Yeah, I know in our language we say, how does she look? In English, it's what does she look like? Here's a typical answer. Oh, she's quite tall, long hair, quite good looking, actually. Well, I think so. Anyway, so you're showing them the correct way of saying it in English, and you're adding and layering their experience so that they're getting your kind of, you know, it's all your experience of how the language works compressed into a kind of narrow slice of time. So you're providing students with this kind of rich input that hopefully will help them push on and move to another level. Obviously, doing this is a little bit more work. It's harder than just saying, it depends on, I agree. But I think it's useful work, it's necessary work, because when you're doing this kind of correction, you're helping students to understand the gap between how they think the language works or how they would like the language to work and how the language really works. It's a kind of noticing exercise in a way. You're giving them the chance to learn better ways of saying what they were trying to say. And you're also, by giving the extra examples, giving them exposure to sometimes more grammatically complex or more subtle ways of expressing themselves. So the student who says, it is depend of my girlfriend, well, by learning, it depends what time she gets home. It depends whether she's going out. Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than what you're saying. But as a teacher, I'm making it available to you to learn if you want to, if you're ready to. Obviously, as a coursebook writer, you know, with things like the outcome series, we try to do this. We try to think about showing students how words interact with other words and how words interact with grammar. So the classroom material can do some of this, but crucially, I think, the teacher can do more of this. Whatever book you're using, whatever level you're teaching, the classroom teacher is the most crucial element in helping students to see how the language works. Another way of thinking about this is when you're dealing with error, okay, and when you're dealing with mistakes. So, give me a minute. Imagine you've asked students to do a little bit of writing. Maybe they're writing conversations that they might have about different weather. And one student writes, drive carefully, it's a really thick fog outside. What I'd like you to do, just quickly, I'll give you like 2 minutes, just stick in the chat box how you think you would correct that, okay? Just write your corrections in the box. What do you think's wrong with it? Give you a minute and I'll have a look at what comes in and then we'll talk about it a bit more. Someone discussed those very mistakes yesterday. There you go. So I'll see what comes in from you. Ah, interesting that you've done that, Natalia. The fog is really sick. I'm guessing you mean thick. There's a really thick fog outside instead of it's, okay? Dense, think fog. I guess you mean thick. The fog's really thick. It's interesting how many different ways of correcting things there might be. Thick fog. Okay, just wait 1 more minute, see what else comes in. Thick fog there. It's really foggy outside. Interesting again. So I think sometimes when you look at these kinds of things, your immediate reaction might be to correct the basic surface mistake, okay? And what you might do is to say, yeah, we don't say thick fog. It's really thick fog outside, and you just cross out the And that was my first reaction. Like, I was aware that's what my brain was telling me to do. Again, with these kind of mistakes, I don't really think they're grammar mistakes. I mean, I don't think doing an exercise on article use or it is versus there is will help you. Okay, I don't think it's the problem. I think the problem is knowing how to use the word fog. So what you might do is to kind of go, okay, drive carefully. there's really thick fog outside, you might tell students, yeah, fog's uncountable, so you don't need an article. Then some of you got there quite quickly. You might think, yeah, actually, more commonly, you just go, it's really foggy outside. Maybe you give them both options, okay? Maybe you say, you can say there's really thick fog, or you can say it's really foggy. Yeah, it's quite common as an adjective. So again, if you're doing this kind of correction, it's grammar, but it's not grammar as maybe we traditionally think about it. It's kind of grammar of words or word grammar. And I think there's another implication, which is when we're teaching vocabulary, which is, you know, every lesson for most teachers, yeah? I'm sure every lesson you do, you're teaching some vocabulary. I think it means we need to think not just about the meaning, not just how to make the meaning clear, but we need to think a bit more about how the words interact with other words, the collocation. We need to think about how the words we're teaching interact with grammar, the colligation. And then maybe we need to think about some of the other language you might see around that, the context. And I think as a teacher, it means understanding that, yeah, definitions are important, but examples of the language in use are at least as important as the definitions. Because what the examples do is they help students get some deeper understanding of normal usage. Michael Hoey talks a lot about the way that the road to proficiency can't be shortcut, okay? Anyone who tells you on Instagram that they can get you from elementary to advanced in 3 weeks or 3 months, or to be honest, you know, 3 years is probably lying to you and just hoping that you're an idiot who's going to give them money. Yeah. You know, as you know, there are much better things you could be donating your money to at the moment. And so I think it's understanding that students only learn this stuff the way that you learned it. They learn it through experience and through exposure. And as teachers, what we can do is we can kind of shortcut this process by providing high reward input that condenses our own experience and maybe saves students time a little bit. So imagine, you know, you're doing a lesson, maybe you're doing a kind of English file lesson where basically you're just looking at meanings. You have some nouns like fog, rain, snow, you know, and you're kind of going fog, picture B, good, rain, picture G, good. Well, just knowing that, oh, fog, oh, rain, it doesn't really help you say very much. I mean, all you can do is stand there and point at things and say the name of them, which is, you know, a slightly weird thing to do. You become one of those weird human naming machines who goes to people's houses and goes, ah, corridor, oh, sofa, you know, curtains. It's like, very good. Slightly weird conversation, but you're very good at pointing at things and telling me the English words for them. For me, what I'm always doing when I'm teaching any kind of vocabulary is I'm thinking, what might my students need to say about these words I'm teaching? What are these words for? What might they hear other people doing with these words? So if I'm teaching a word like fog, I'm already thinking about, okay, when do I talk about fog? What kind of examples are there? And what I'm thinking about is things like this. God, it was crazy. We were up in the mountains and the fog was so thick, we couldn't even see 50 feet in front of us. Yeah, listen, I'm afraid I'm not going to get to Prague tonight because all the flights out of Gatwick have been cancelled because of the fog. Hey, be careful how you drive tonight. The fog's really thick out there. Maybe you just give students one of those sentences. Maybe you give them 2 of those sentences. If you're worried, or I'm not sure I can think of these examples in class, do what I do and cheat, okay? When you're planning your lessons, look up in a dictionary, have a think about how the words work, copy a couple of examples from the dictionary, bring them in with you. While students are doing the exercise and checking, you can just write a couple of extra sentences up on the board, or you can send the extra sentences to the students on, you know, a Word document or a Google Doc or something after the class. And again, this takes you a little bit longer, but it's time well spent. You know, that kind of like French nouvelle cuisine idea that less is more. And you go to some very expensive French restaurant and they bring you like this big plate with some tiny little piece of food in the middle and going to go, Monsieur, voila. You know, well, that's it. That's my dinner. It's not enough. Well, when you're learning a language, less is not more. You know, more is more, amazingly. And I think by providing students with more input and more examples, you're showing students more about how the words work. You're showing them about the grammar that often goes with the word and the collocations and the cotext. And if you want to, you can also focus on the big Raymond Murphy's English grammar in use kind of grammar. So you might have a sentence like, all flights out of Gatwick have been cancelled because of the fog. If you're teaching kind of, you know, B1 level students maybe. And then you can ask them, yeah, what tense is it? Present perfect. Yeah. Why? From the past to now. Good. Just checking. Active or passive? Passive. How do you know? Have been cancelled. Good. Just checking. Okay. And I think by doing that kind of thing a lot, it's not a grammar lesson. You know, I'm not presenting the present perfect. They've met the present perfect before. What I am doing is just keeping the grammar moving in their heads. And I think over time, you know, it takes time. Over time, that's really how they come to a fuller understanding of how the grammar actually works and what people use these words to say and use these words to do. So one other thing you can think about with all of this is two-way translation. And if you're one of those teachers that's been told you should never use your mother tongue in a classroom, you've been lied to by monolingual native speakers who are scared of you because you have a superpower. And your superpower in your instance is you're bilingual, or for many of you, trilingual. Yeah, I know a lot of you will speak Ukrainian and English and maybe Russian, and you'll have a lot of students who speak Ukrainian and maybe Russian. And as a result, you can do this kind of two-way translation thing. When you're translating, particularly if you're translating whole sentences, it's usually easy to translate back into your first language. Okay, so you take, he wants me to study law, you translate it back into Ukrainian, that's fine. Say you wait a week and you come back to that sentence and you don't see the English sentence. Maybe you've got it on a Quizlet card with two sides, or you've got it on a piece of paper that you fold in half, however you want to do it. When you're looking at your first language version and you're trying to remember the second language version, that's when you notice how good a learner you are. Because lots of students will say, yeah, I understand the Ukrainian. In English, it's, he wants that I study law. And then you check it and you're like, oh, God, I forgot. They do it differently in English. And that kind of catches that tendency that we all have to bring our first language with us. And it kind of forces you to pay attention to, you know, the different patterns, the different way the language works. I had a French student years ago who wanted to pass first certificate, but basically just spoke French in English. So he would say things like, for me, it is not necessary for to study the grammar because all of the people with whom I am speaking are telling me I am comprehensible. And I kind of go, right, so you think you don't need to study grammar because everyone you talk to understands you. This is what I just tell you. So no, it's not. Yeah, that's how you say it in English. What you've done is translated it directly from French. And we used to do a lot of this two-way translation. And one of the first things he translated was, I haven't seen you for ages. And I remember him saying, this is a very stupid exercise because in my language, it is the same. that way. It won't be the same because your language is French, which isn't English. It's very easy to translate. So he translated it. A week later, I just said, okay, here's the French. Tell me the English. This is very stupid. The English is, it is a long time since I did not see you. Okay. And basically, you know, he'd understood the English perfectly. He's translated it perfectly. When he tried to repeat that idea in English, he just directly translated it from French. You know, it is a long time since I didn't see you, instead of I haven't seen you for ages. And suddenly you could see him kind of realizing, like, oh, this is what I've been doing all of these years. I've been understanding English above my level. I've been thinking about what it means in my own language. I've been communicating those ideas, but not really in English, but in kind of Franglish. And so I think anything you can do with two-way translation, particularly where you're looking at those kind of little patterns around words, you know, little grammatical patterns, micro grammatical patterns, is really, really useful. And it forces students to pay attention. You know, there's no hiding when you're doing those kinds of exercises. I do it myself when I'm learning foreign languages on my phone, just with Quizlet cards, that kind of thing. You know, the easy thing for me to do is to see the foreign language and remember the English. The harder thing to do is to see the English and remember the foreign language. Oh, there's a little echo there. So just some final thoughts. I think one thing is be careful about the way you think about development. Once students get past pre-intermediate, basically big grammar, Raymond Murphy grammar, the present simple, the future continuous, you know, was going to talk about future in the past. That's basically not the biggest problem students have. They've already met most of the grammar they're ever going to need. Most students understand the basic meanings of a lot of words. What they don't have is kind of experience of and an understanding of the way in which those words interact with grammar and with other words. So I think as teachers, what it means is we need to think about how we correct, and maybe correct a bit more cleverly, give a bit more input to students to help them see similar patterns. We need to work from what the students say or write and repackage it for them and give it back to them. And when we're teaching vocabulary, we need to be thinking not just about the meaning, but about what students might want to do with those words, what they might hear being done with those words, and what grammar and other vocabulary that means we need to show them along with the word we're teaching. I'm going to stop there and just say a couple of quick things and then see if anyone's got any questions. If any of you are having trouble sleeping, and you know, I know there may be lots of reasons why that's true at the moment, here are some big, scary, heavy books that might help you sleep. You know, good luck with the J.R. Firth books. The Hoey book is maybe a bit more accessible. It's a very, very good read, but take your time with it. Anyone who wants to get in touch with me, who wants copies of the PowerPoint or anything, or who just has random questions, you can contact me, hugh@lexicallab.com. Please do check out the website. We have a little online language school, mostly teaching language teachers. We also run teacher training summer courses in London. All of that's on www.lexicallab.com. And if you are on Instagram and you're not following us yet, please find and follow. It's lexical_lab. I'm going to stop there and just throw it over to you and see if anyone's got any questions you want to ask, anything you're not sure of, any comments. Okay. I will open the chat box and see what comes up. Ah, you did two-way translation. That's good to hear. You're welcome, Alexandra. Anything anyone wants to ask or question or argue about, or yeah, Lexical Grammar by Leo Sullivan is good as well, I think. Yeah. it's another one to add to your kind of little lexical pile. You're welcome, Halina and Reisa. Thank you, thank you. Thanks for attending. You're welcome, Elena. I'll just wait 1 minute or two to see if anyone's got any questions. I'm guessing the people with questions, hey, you're welcome. Takes longer to write questions than it does to write thank you. So, you know, it's a bit like when you're in class. Yeah, you're welcome, you're welcome. Thank you, Irina. Usually when you say, has anyone got any questions? If you wait 5 seconds longer than you feel comfortable with, there's always that shy person at the back who's kind of slowly raising their hand. So maybe one of you shy people are slowly typing, excuse me, slowly typing a question. Excuse me. Thank you. That's a very automatic use of a fixed expression there. Look at that training. Yeah. Okay, if any of you do think of any questions or anything you want to ask, email me or message me through Instagram. Well, thank you. Thank you for starting on outcomes. And I'm pleased you noticed the difference compared with English file. Thank you very much. If you tell your students that's the English way of saying it. So, I mean, in that situation, it depends what you're asking about. Let me just see who asked that question. Let me just check the name. I missed it. It was Ole. Yeah. So it depends. If it's things like, you know, he wants me to study grammar and the students are saying, why? Why is it like that? There is no why. Okay. That's just how it's said in English. And I think the way I usually deal with that is I call this the mesa technique. Because years ago, I had a Spanish student called Carlos, and he was always asking me, like, Hugh, but why is it like this in English? Why English is so stupid? Why English is so crazy? And I said, Carlos, look, okay, what do you call this thing in Spanish? The table, what do you call it? It's a mesa. Okay, why do you call it a mesa? Why? Because it's a Spanish. Okay, so there's no reason, right? You call it a mesa, we call it a table. The Spanish is mesa, the English is table, because. Every time Carlos asked me, but Hugh, why I have to say he wants me to? Why not he wants that I? Because mesa, Carlos, okay? It's just a mesa, yeah? This is the only answer to this question. If they're asking you, why do you say all the flights have been cancelled? Well, you can answer that one because it's from the past to now, and there's a present result, which is I can't fly. So we use the present perfect. So with the grammar questions, big grammar, okay, you know, why don't you say, I've been there 5 years ago? Well, because 5 years ago, finished, no connection to now, I went there, past simple. Those questions you can answer. There's a why. But why do we say, I agree, not I am agree? Because that's English. You know, I mean, all you can do, it's a good opportunity to teach the expression, don't shoot the messenger, okay? You know, all you can do is just say, listen, I don't make the rules, crazy English. Don't ask me, you know, they're weird. Yeah, don't shoot the messenger. That's all you can do, basically. So I understand that students get frustrated with that, but eventually, if you just keep saying, because it's a mesa, okay, or whatever your local version of that is, they'll stop asking you because it's like, there is no why. You start to sound like Yoda in Star Wars, you know, why? There is not. There is only be. It's just the way it is. You know, you just have to accept that. And the sooner students accept that, the easier their life will become. You're welcome, Helena, and thank you to Ukraine for what you're doing to, you know, fight for freedom and for democracy and to protect the rest of Europe. Can I actually ask, how do I look? Yes, you can. Yeah, like, you know, if you kind of got your fancy new outfit on or something, or you're dressed up for dinner or for a date or something, you might ask someone, how do I look? Hey, you look great. Look at you with your new suit on. Yeah, you can there, yeah. Who was that? Daniel. Nice to hear you're inspired. What else have we got? There was one more down here. Yeah, I talked about is it in tag questions. Yeah, I mean, it's not, well, in a way, it's that you know more grammar rules, because actually what you know is that native speakers don't always follow the grammar rules as explained in Raymond Murphy's Grammar in Use, and that sometimes, being quite lazy people by nature, we just use the short version, which is, isn't it? You know, and I mean, I hear it all the time in London. It's people will kind of go, you know, he broke his leg. Is it? Yeah, they're getting divorced. Is it? It's not grammar as you see it taught in course books, but it's grammar as it's used. And, you know, again, there's two different things. There's kind of grammar that you might need to pass an exam, and grammar that you might hear in a TV program set in London that might surprise you because no one's ever told you it can work like that. So I think every language does that, no? You know, every language, there's another question tag. No. Yeah, every language does that, no? Every language has the kind of formal official grammar, and then you have things that, you know, are just things that people say. How to correct the third person singular by saying s, 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 s. That's it. That's all you can do. Okay. You can do that 100 times and you sound a bit like a kind of mad snake, and it won't stop them making that mistake, basically, because correction of these things does not lead to immediate correct reproduction. Students probably know that there's a third person S, but their brains aren't yet ready to make that change or make that transition, because it doesn't really kind of affect the meaning. If you kind of go, I go swimming, he goes swimming, you go swimming, we go swimming. Well, I understand everybody's going swimming. Yeah. You can correct it to, you know, he goes swimming every weekend. And students will say, yeah, he goes. Yeah, he goes. Next week, they'll go, he goes swimming. You go, oh, geez. Yeah, he goes. You can keep having that conversation for a long time, because that won't stop until they're kind of upper intermediate, getting on for advanced, basically. Yeah, because it takes time for those mistakes to disappear, because that's how language learning works. It's not because they haven't seen it with a third person S before, and it's not because they haven't been corrected before. You think of kids learning their own first language. Kids make mistakes for years, despite all the input, all the correct language that they hear. I would just say, don't beat yourself up about it. Correct it sometimes, point it out sometimes. I mean, if they're elementary or pre-intermediate, I wouldn't even worry about it. Yeah, I would just kind of go, oh, he goes swimming. Where does he go? You know, just kind of correct it with your own teacher talk. Maybe just reword it. You know, my father work in bank. Oh, your dad works in a bank. Where does he work? Which bank? Oh, he works in the center of town. And you just do it like that. You kind of just repeat but correct without saying explicitly, I'm correcting your terrible English. You just do it through your teacher talk, like you do when you're talking to your own children. You know, I mean, when my kids were really little, if my kids kind of go, want milk, what I would do is go, oh, do you want some milk? Want some milk? And, you know, eventually, like 3 years later, they might learn to say, I want some milk. Or maybe even, could you possibly get me some milk, please? But, you know, it takes time to get to that stage. Yeah. Yeah, the same with I like read. Oh, you like reading. What kind of things do you like reading? You know, you just do it like that. And eventually something clicks and something changes. But I think for teachers, it's important to understand correction doesn't lead to immediate internal rewiring of the brain. You know, you need to kind of get in there and change some connections, but we can't do that. Okay, thank you all very much for attending. I hope there was something in there that relates to you and your own teaching. Thank you all for the amazing work I know that you're all doing with your students under very difficult circumstances. Thanks to Marina for inviting me, and Slava Ukraine.
Героям слава! Thank you, Hugh, so much for everything that you are doing.
Thank you.
For today, and we hope to meet you again.
You will do. You will do.
Anytime. We will. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone here.
Thank you. Yeah. Take care, everyone. And to all my students out there that I can see, I'll see you next week. Yeah. Take care.
Yeah.
See you soon. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.